Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives, and today we're going to be discussing episodes 23 and 24 of Steven Universe, Monster Buddies, and an Indirect Kiss. Now let's start with Monster Buddies. And in this episode, Steven and the Gems are investigating a snowy cavern. Essentially, what's going on is that they are looking for an artifact called a shooting star. An ancient artifact that is supposed to be so hot that the only way to keep it contained is to rest it in the heart of a snowy mountain, and as a result, no human hands can actually touch it. Unfortunately, it's well guarded as there's a monster just outside the cavern that the Gems have to fight, and while they're able to subdue it, unfortunately the fight causes a cave-in. And as a result, the Gems believe that Steven is at risk since he's human, and so they decide to get him out of there. How? By bubbling him. I think I've mentioned this maybe once or twice, but how the Gems typically deal with monsters, that whenever they defeat them, the monsters, well, poof, and all that's left is a gemstone. The Gems bubble up the gem, tap the top of the bubble, and it disappears to their temple. And as such, after they defeat the ice monster that was guarding the caverns, Garnet does the same thing to Steven, puts him in a bubble, and then ports him back to the temple. As such, Steven arrives in the heart of the temple like before, and upon arriving in the heart of the temple, he realistically tries to figure out how to get out of his bubble. He manages to get out, but upon popping it, he accidentally ends up popping another bubble containing another monster. In this case, the Centipedal from episode 1. And while Steven does initially get freaked out as this thing starts reforming, instead of turning into the giant monster that Steven and the Gems fought in the first episode, it's instead a small creature, and instead of directly attacking Steven, it looks scared, just freaked out. It doesn't know where it is and what's going on. As such, Steven, realizing this, does try to make nice with it. He starts calmly talking to it, starts saying, "Hey, do you want to come over here?" and actually trying to make friends with it. But that kind of gets sabotaged when the Gems show up to most likely pick up Steven. They see that he accidentally releases Centipedal, and while they initially try to fight it back, afraid that it might have hurt Steven, Steven stands up for it and says that it didn't actually try to attack him, so he believes that maybe it could be tamed. As such, while the Gems are a bit hesitant to follow Steven's suggestion, his pleading does kind of hit Garnet, and so she decides to give Steven a chance. As such, Steven begins training the Centipedal, and it actually does seem to make progress as he actually shows it friendship rather than hostility. He gives it treats. He gives it treats in the form of chips. That ultimately allows it to warm up to him. And when Steven is attacked by a seagull, the Centipedal defends it. And as a result, Steven believes it's trustworthy. As such, he shows it out to the Gems and showcases that he can command it to spit acid, because it can spit acid, by just squawking, which leads to a rather funny scene where the Gems keep avoiding it and it ends up destroying Amethyst's tortilla or torta. I don't know what it is. It looks like a sandwich. Either way, the Gems are still a little hesitant, but Steven is still vouching for the Centipedal, so they still give it a chance. As a result of this, the Gems kind of have to redirect their priorities back to the ice cavern, because unfortunately another reason why they jumped ship was because the cavern has completely caved in. They can't get through. And it's going to take a while to move all the boulders, so they need to find a way to get through. How? So, well, Garnet thinks she has a plan, and that plan is now Centipedal. And sure enough, they bring Centipedal back with them to the ice cavern, and it actually works. As Steven is able to come, as bit by bit, it starts melting through the cavern, and it allows Steven and the Gems to get further and further in, with Steven continuously rewarding the Centipedal with the promise of chips. And as a result, they do manage to get further and further in, until finally they do manage to reach the heart of the cavern and find the shooting star. Unfortunately, because of its intense heat, they have to take precautions when holding it, because it's so hot that I'm guessing that your hands would probably burn up. So Garnet tries to grab the shooting star with her gauntlets, and the sight of the gauntlets causes the Centipedal to freak out. And as it's freaking out, it starts wailing its head, and it starts spitting acid at the stalactites in the ceiling. And as a result of this, when Steven tries to calm it down, he accidentally pulls its hair, so it bites him, And so the gems, seeing the centipede freaking out, decide, no, this was a bad idea. We need to stop this thing before it hurts anyone, before it hurts Steven. As such, they end up fighting the centipede, which continues aggravating it and causing it to spit more acid. But Steven continues vouching for it and eventually does get between it and the gems. And while it's still a bit hectic and shaky, Steven is able to get up close to it and ultimately give it a hug and calm it down. So it does seem to get back to normal. Unfortunately, there are still consequences of its actions, as in the struggle with the centipede this time, a big stalactite started cracking, and unfortunately, Steven was right underneath it, and just as it falls down, the centipede sees it and pushes Steven right out of the way, which saves him, but crushes the centipede. Ultimately, it's unharmed because its gemstone remains intact, but it does end up poofing it. As such, Steven is remorseful about the centipedal getting poofed, but Garnet does state that Steven actually did manage to tame it, and he clearly did make some progress. And Garnet even admits that Sir Steven's mom had similar aspirations. She did try to use her powers to heal the monsters in the past. It's just that she hasn't really had much success. So the gems believe that Steven's actions, well, altruistic as they were, actually did help make progress, and that maybe one day he could probably surpass his mother and possibly heal them all. As such, Steven, kind of filled with hope, decides one day he will heal those monsters, but till then he'll keep them safe. And as Steven takes Centipedal's gem, he forms his own bubble, which actually shocks all the gems. As such, Steven ends up sending it back to the temple with a little tap on the top, but adding a bit of extra insurance, he also sends back the bag of chips for the day that Centipede eventually comes back. That's Monster Buddies. Let's talk about an Indirect Kiss. And in this case, what prompts this episode's plot is Steven going to have a picnic with Connie. Their picnic is kind of located on the mountain that the temple is on, and the mountain that the temple is on has a lighthouse on top of it, and a new addition to the lighthouse area is a fence. Connie, as she's setting up, notices the fence, and when Steven arrives with Lion, well, Connie notices that Steven seems a bit depressed. As such, while she tries prodding Steven about this, he doesn't really open up about it, but so Connie kind of goes for a different avenue. She wants to know how the fence came about. As such, Steven does start the story about that, and it turns out the reason the fence came about was because Amethyst was horseplaying. Earlier she had been playing on the mountain and was just kind of goofing off, and while Steven tried to get her to back away, Amethyst, being Amethyst, continued to give Fate the middle finger, and well, let's just say karma hits like a bitch, because as she stands on the edge of the mountain, a bit of it crumbles and she falls off, slamming face first into a rock. Now, first it looks okay, but when Steven comes down to try and check on her, there is some damage. She's got a big bulbous eye that looks now like a googly eye. And the reason for this? When she landed on the rock, she cracked her gemstone. As such, this is the reason why the offense has been put up, but of course, Connie wants to know what happened to Amethyst, and this is where we learn something interesting. You see, as we learned with Pearl in the Steven the Swordfighter episode, a center of a gem's being is the gemstone, as long as that stone is intact, then a gem is ultimately fine. If their body is destroyed, they can still get back up and come back. But if something happens to the gemstone, it can have an adverse effect on the physical form of the gem. In this case, the crack is causing deformations to Amethyst, which is the googly eye being the first example. And on top of that, and as the crack continues to worsen, it in turn begins having more of a negative impact on Amethyst. First, she starts speaking backwards, and as it gets more aggravated, her head and her foot switch places. Then, and when it gets even further aggravated, her limbs start turning into noodle limbs. So, yeah, it's clear that this needs to be fixed post-haste. But unfortunately, the best solution for this was Rose Quartz. You see, one of Rose's powers was that she had healing tears. She felt so much love for every living thing and when she felt sorrow if any of them were hurt, and thus well, her tears had the magical powers of healing anything that was wounded. As such, since Stephen is Rose's son, they think that if he can cry, he can possibly heal Amethyst Gem. But unfortunately, Stephen's not really finding it in him to cry at the moment. So they kind of have to go with a backup plan. A fountain that Rose had kept that's supposed to essentially have, well, her tears, so to speak. Unfortunately, when the gems port to where the fountain is, it turns out it's overrun with brambles. Very aggressive brambles, which may or may not be extensions of the moss that we saw in the Lars and the Cool Kids episode. Which, as a result, Stephen and the gems keep go further and further into the fountain, and with Pearl having little mini freakouts. I'll get to that at the end. And while they do eventually reach the center, they find that the whole fountain is not flowing at all. As such, Garnet and Pearl go off to investigate, and while Stephen is still struggling to cry, and every time he tries or feels he's getting emotional, unfortunately, it's still not working, to the point where he actually is starting to worry that something is wrong with him, that he's not measuring up. And it does just start making him wonder, what can I do? What can I do? How can I be this warrior? How can I be this person that everyone wants me to be? Unfortunately, this line of questioning is cut short as Stephen and Amethyst are attacked by more of the brambles. They manage to manage to get into the fountain, which thankfully, thanks to its raised walls or sides or whatever, a lot stops the brambles from getting them. But Stephen, kind of hit with all the emotional stuff, does start feeling sad and does ultimately cry, but the tears don't seem to heal Amethyst. Well, kind of. As after he cries, suddenly the fountain springs to life, and as it begins flowing, it pretty much floods the area. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. You probably are hearing chewing in the background. That's Chindi chewing on a bone or rawhide, so just letting you know ahead, just giving you a heads up, and it fell off the bed. Anyway, as I was saying, so Stephen, as such, while it floods the area and gets rid of all the brambles, it also manages to heal the Amethyst Gem. Stephen at first thinks that, oh, I did this, it happened because of me. It did not. It turns out that the reason the fountain is flowing is because Garnet and Pearl unclogged part of the fountain, which got it flowing again. As such, that's why Stephen was depressed earlier, because he feels that he really had nothing to do with it, and that he may never develop any special powers down the line, even though an episode earlier he created a bubble. As such, in the present, as he's telling this to Connie does try comforting Stephen, because he begins feeling that if he doesn't have any powers and he can't hang out with the gems, can't go on missions, but Connie assures him that even if he doesn't, it'll just make him like her, and he doesn't need special powers for them to be together. Which does lead to a little sweet moment as things get quiet, they both start blushing. Connie gets a little closer when suddenly she has a headache. You see, something I neglected to mention during the story summary is that we do occasionally cut back to Stephen and Connie as they have their picnic, and a stipulation for Stephen continuing part of the story was that he wanted to try on Connie's glasses, and Connie said fine, but only if I get your juice box, and Stephen warned her fine, but it's mostly backwash. So they did trade, and while Stephen did eventually return Connie's glasses because, well, they aren't his prescription and they were giving him a headache, she kept drinking his juice box. And as they're talking, she suddenly has a headache. As a result of this, she takes off her glasses and finds that she can see without them. Her eyes have somehow healed. Stephen, of course, is wondering, what the heck? How did this happen? And he looks at the juice box, and you can see a little bit of sparkling coming from it. It turns out that Stephen does have healing powers. He has healing spit. While Connie's, of course, like freaking out because how's she going to explain this to her parents or optometrist or whoever, Stephen is now just over the moon and happy and says thank you to Connie before he and Lion go off to tell the gems. And the episode ends with Connie taking her glasses, popping out the lenses, and putting them back on. We'll get to that in a later episode, but yeah. Those are the episodes. Again, apologies if you keep hearing the clinking behind me. Chindi is right there, and she's chewing, and unfortunately, this is probably a consequence of getting her to not mess with the camera. So I apologize for any technical difficulties, and if that does impede you from enjoying the video. Anyway, let's talk about an indirect... One second. Sorry about that. I was just thinking I could try and solve the problem. Anyway, let's talk about Monster Buddies first. What I like about this episode is that it's a nice little character piece. It's a nice little character piece for Steven. Actually, in a way, both of these episodes are, but both in different ways. In the case of Monster Buddies, it's another bit of growth on Steven's half. In this case, in relation to the monsters. In this case, we see Steven actually opening up to the monsters and advocating once again for thinking outside the box. We've seen in earlier episodes that one of Steven's strengths compared to the gems is that he actually does try to think situations through. He's not just hit thing until it stops. And we see that here with the centipedal. While he initially does freak out when it reforms, as he pays more attention to it, he begins noticing that it's not acting like a feral monster. It's acting like a scared animal. It seems to have no idea what's going on, and as you do when you encounter scared animals in the wild, instead of treating it with hostility, which in turn breeds more hostility. One more second. Last time, I swear. But like I said, Steven actually does approach it with kindness, and what I like is that the kindness actually does help. As he actually starts treating the centipede less like a monster and more like, well, a companion, it in turn is actually reciprocating that kindness. It treats with Steven it acts kind to Steven, works with him on a command, actually cooperates with him on missions, and by the end, because he showed kindness to it and treated it like a friend, it's willing to put itself on the line. I said this is the last time? I'm wrong. Ginny left the room. Anyway, like I said, because he showed kindness to this creature, it put its own existence on the line to help him. And that's kind of something interesting with it. That's kind of another thing with Steven. Steven is just, what I like is that it showcased another aspect of his personality, his kindness. While the gems are not bad people, they do fight these monsters because they do want to protect the people of the world from these things. At the same time, as we've seen with other episodes, they are a bit detached when it comes to personal affection, when it comes to personal stuff. They don't really, when people suffer because of their actions, they don't really care. And by that same token, they kind of find it hard to empathize. And we kind of see that with the monsters. The instant they see Steven with the centipedal, they immediately go on the offensive, which is a fair enough assessment, considering the first time we saw this thing, it was a monster that actively attacked them. Yeah, that's a good assumption. That's probably a good angle to take. But as Steven gets to know it, rather than treating it like an animal that doesn't know what it's doing, they continually treat it as if it is just playing with them, that it's just a creature that's waiting for them to turn their backs, and then they have to take it down. That is how they treat it. It's like they treat it like they just treat it like it's feral, that it needs to be put down. But Steven throughout the episode continues advocating for the creature's existence, and that it isn't just a monster that's there to destroy. It does have feelings, it does have emotions, and if you want it to not be a monster, you have to just treat it with kindness. And throughout the episode, Steven keeps doing that with the centipedal, and that kindness is in turn repaid. And this is a large aspect of Steven's character, his empathy for creatures, for all living things, which is something that he kind of shares with his mother. Like I said, we don't, all the stories we've heard, this is probably one of the aspects where we learn about, as we learn in the next episode, Rose cared about all living things, and she did, and like Garnet mentioned at the end of the episode, she did try to heal these monsters, but she was never successful. So seeing Steven kind of going down his own route, and the gems being proud of him for trying to do this, it's nice. I like that. It showcases that Steven is once again growing. He tried to help the centipedal, despite the fact that most of the gems were against him. Even Garnet, while she was always the one to advocate for Steven's way, was also clearly not completely on board with what he was doing. She only did it because Steven said it was okay, and so she was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and let him try things his way. So I like that. To see Steven go against the gems and try his own method and for it to actually show some progress. I like that. And it showcases again more of Steven's character. And by the end, it's further emphasized when Steven says despite that he hopes to one day help the other monsters, which again showcases with more character progress as we see him form his own bubble without on his own. It's the first time he's ever formed a bubble in the series, so it's a massive leap forward, and it's only happened after he had that major revelation. So I like stuff like that, and it's a great character piece, and again, does get revisited in a later episode. So again, kudos on that. Nice little thing, and it does showcase more of Steven as a character and his love for all living things, which does become a driving force for his character later on in the series. On top of that, this episode also offers some interesting hints in regards to future revelations. If you pay attention to the series, then you could probably guess the reveal, but I'm not going to reveal it until it's actually stated. But I will talk about the hints towards it. In this case, with the stuff with Centipedal. Centipedal mentioned I mentioned before how Centipedal had if you pay attention to the series, you will notice that when it comes to the Centipedal or any of the monsters in the series, whenever they get destroyed, they all usually leave a gemstone behind. And in this case, and when Steven popped the bubble that Centipedal's gem was in, it began to reform. Kind of like what happened with Pearl in Steven the Sword Fighter. In that game, and it was even a similar case. When the monster got destroyed, when the monster's physical form was damaged to the point where it would be fatal, it poofed and its gem went inactive. So and even when it all was reformed early in the episode, it didn't look like a monster at first. When it began to reform, it first took on a more humanoid appearance. Head, arms, legs, a body. It wasn't until its hair suddenly popped out that suddenly it began adopting its more feral features. It's again, I'm not going to say what this is, but what I do like is that it's one of those times where if you really do pay attention to the show, you can guess what the reveal is before the reveal, which I think is actually good storytelling. It's visual storytelling. Again, I'm not going to say what it was, though you can probably guess what it is very easily based on what I just said, but I do like how they showcase the eventual twist in this episode. Just showcasing little things that ultimately reveal one very important truth. And I like how they showcase that with Centipedal. This reveal is even further emphasized by the line Garnet said, that Rose tried to heal these creatures with her powers, but was never successful. And as we learn in the next episode, she had healing powers from her tears. But if these things were monsters, what was there to heal? Food for thought. So, again, I like that. I like that little hints towards future episodes. So, good on this episode for that. And speaking of healing tears, let's talk about an Indirect Kiss. This is, again, like I said, this is another character piece for Steven. In this case, it's dealing with mommy issues. In this, these issues have been touched on in the past, and especially, we've seen them touched on as early as the second episode and Lars and the Cool Kids. As in Lars and the Cool Kids, Steven had his outburst at Lars about where he said, "What do you know about Mom? I don't even know my mom." Or in the second episode where he talked to the laser light cannon, where he was yelling at the laser light cannon, all these people are depending on you. They need you right now. You can't be useless. And it's further touched on in this episode. In this case, what's going with seeing Amethyst's gem continually getting cracked and Steven desperately trying to heal her by crying and failing. What makes it very interesting is that you see how this is affecting Steven. And one more second, it's Chindy again. So anyway, so what I like is that you see how this is affecting Steven, especially in regards to how other characters are reacting to Steven continuously not showing results. Throughout the whole episode, you see Steven desperately trying to be useful, to cry, just to be able to do what his mother could do, be as good as his mom, But every time he falls flat, he gets a little bit more desperate. It just starts getting to him more and more. And it's not helped when you see how the gems are reacting to Steven's lack of progress. In the case of Garnet, we see her get frustrated. We don't actually see her emote it facially, but you do see it through her actions. First she's a bit more blunt. She starts getting a bit less patient when the group gets to the fountain, as when they're trying to find a way in, she just grabs a boulder and punches it through and says she needed that. When Steven almost gets emotional but fails to cry, she just kind of angrily goes off with Pearl without even saying anything. And Pearl is just, she's on the verge of a fucking breakdown throughout this whole episode. This is the first episode where we see that Pearl kind of had feelings for Rose. Because, well, let's just say that when she describes the fountain and how it flows with Rose's lacrimal essence, it's a little bit more personal than you think. And throughout the whole episode, you kind of see her just having like little freakouts at seeing the fountain get overrun with brambles. Even to the point where we get to some more character stuff where she says oh, look at these things. They're a mess without her guidance. Chindi. They're a mess without her guidance. They don't know what they're doing. They're directionless. It's all calm. We can't let it change our memories of her. We gotta be calm. It's interesting because you see her just kind of slowly losing it throughout the episode. So I do like that, but it also helps add to Steven's character, and by the end, more of his trauma. Keep in mind, like I said, Steven never got the chance to know his mom, and the way everybody talks about her, he is always living in her shadow. And this episode really emphasizes that. He is trying so desperately throughout the episode to try and be useful, to be as good as his mom was for the group, if not better. But every single time he tries, he comes up short, and it keeps getting to him. And it leads to, honestly, a very bare moment where when he and Amethyst are alone in the fountain, he's like sitting on the edge of it and sees a statue of Rose and just kind of rests on its lap and says, I never got the chance to know you. I keep hearing stories about you, but I never knew you. What were you like, and so forth. She's about to jump off the bed. Sorry about that. You kind of see how this is beginning to affect. Like, you see that more of the mental anguish on Steven. He keeps thinking, because again, he's kind of got big shoes to fill. His mom, everybody in some way reveres his mom. Keeps talking all these big shit about her. But Steven, her kin, her son, her child, never got the chance to know her. And anytime anyone talks about his mother, it's always in some high regard. And in this case, when Steven is needed for something big and something that his mom could have very easily done, he keeps falling short. And it makes sense why. And honestly, with those expectations, it makes sense why at the end, why in the framing device of the episode, Steven is depressed, because he's told this big expectation that he's supposed to fill, and by the end, even when Amethyst is healed, he didn't make it. He feels like he fell short, that he feels like he's failing as a crystal gem, and that if he can't be the person his mom was, then he can't be a gem. And honestly, you can see how this is kind of affecting him negatively, how this is hurting him. It's like you're the child of a great hero, and then the great hero passes on, and everybody expects you to be just like them. In this case, and it's exactly the case. Steven feels that pressure, and even though he is not Rose, he's constantly getting all this excess pressure to be like her, to perform the miracle she performed. And imagine being a kid and living in that shadow. Put simply, that's a heavy weight to bear. And if you bear it long enough, eventually you're going to get a broken back. So I do like how they showcase that with Steven and how it's affecting him negatively, and kind of the dual side of being this child superhero. He has to learn, not only learning how to master his powers, but having to master them in the right way, so to speak, just to be able to even to be able to even look at the image of his mother. I like that. It's very interesting and very good character stuff. And again, there's still more good character stuff with the gems as we see the reactions to Steven kind of coming up short throughout the episode. Amethyst is Amethyst. Throughout the whole episode, she just kind of rolls with all the punches and is even worried about Steven getting hurt from the brambles, the point even when it starts exacerbating her gem. Pearl is a mess. And this is the first episode where we see that she possibly had feelings for Rose and tied some of her self-worth to her, especially when she talked about the brambles, which, yeah, it's clear that she was talking about herself a bit. And we even start seeing that with Garnet with her physicality, as she gets more silent, more brooding, a bit more we get a bit less patient as things are continually getting worse, and their gems aren't getting any answers. I like that. You do start to see that, and again, that all still feeds back into Steven's character. But once again, it does still show Steven continuing on and growing, as by the end of the episode, he does learn he does have healing powers. It's just they're his own brand. In this case, healing spit. Hence why the episode is called An Indirect Kiss, as it's with an indirect kiss that he wound up healing Connie's eyes. I like that. It's showcasing Steven growing further while also kind of showing the double-edged sword of being the son of Rose Quartz. And without really spoiling anything, this is just the tip of the iceberg of that. This is just the tip of the iceberg of that, and trust me, it gets worse. So I like that. And again, the stuff with Connie where she has a bit of a freak out before popping out the glass in her glasses, that gets revisited later. So I like that. It's still more plot threads for future episodes. So overall, I do like both episodes. They're both very good characters. They're both very good character pieces for Steven. One showcasing his heart and how the lengths he'll go to help others, even if they're monsters, while also hinting at a big reveal later on. And the second episode is a good one, showcasing the negativity of kind of living in his mother's shadow and having to live up to her memory, while also laying the foundation for future plot threads, again, with other characters, like with Pearl, Garnet, and Connie. So I like stuff like that. I think it works. So overall, very good pair of episodes, and I had a good time watching them. So, yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I hope that you were okay with Chindy continuously doing things that caused me to pause the video. And as for next time, the Steven Universe retrospectives are going to be going on a 1-week hiatus, as next week I'm going to be doing a vlog on Thor: Love and Thunder. But when we do return to Steven Universe, it's going to be with a two-parter, as a new character is introduced to the show that carries with her some very big revelations. So, I hope you tune in for that one. And as always, I'm Samuel Johnson. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a good night. Take care.